Ranieri tries one.
Today, Arsenal made transfer history, and they did that by making the first £1 million signing in women's football history. And that is all that happened today. No other signings. We're not going to talk about anything else. We're just going to talk about the player that the Arsenal women's team acquired from Liverpool. Unfortunately, that's not the case. Or maybe fortunately. I don't know. Drew and I are going to get to the bottom of that today. We're going to talk about the Noni Madueke signing that both David Ornstein and Fabrizio Romano have come out and essentially confirmed is happening. It's just about done. Madueke is probably going to be announced as an Arsenal player imminently. So a lot of Arsenal, Twitter and a lot of the Arsenal fan base, myself included, have been reckoning with that and trying to come to terms with that. So, Drew and I are going to talk about Noni Madueke and kind of how that fits in to the team, maybe the case for him, how that's going to affect other transfers that have been linked to us that have been mooted. And we're also going to do a little bit about Christian Norgaard being officially announced by the club. But before we get into all of that, let me bring in my co-host here, Drew, who you can follow on Twitter at GeeChyKid. Drew, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm good. My allergies have been so bad, it looks like I have a black eye, but I don't, which is interesting. I'm good otherwise. I'm not as angry as a lot of fans are today with the news, or even yesterday, and I didn't sign any petitions. I'm not threatening to leave. I'm not threatening to leave the fan base in frustration, or make a sign for match day 1. So yeah, I'm in good shape.
Oh man, I was going to ask you how the other guy looked, but now I know it's just allergies.
Yeah, kind of like a barroom brawl, which is insane. But here we are. So
can we just talk for a second about how crazy the response has been? Like, look, I'm not a massive fan of the move, but the way that people have really responded vehemently to this, like getting in his Instagram DMs and abusing him and signing petitions on change.org and very proudly too. I called out someone for getting into Madueke's DMs, and I had like half a dozen people respond just like, well, that's what we have to do. That's the only way to make sure this guy doesn't join the club. Just it's really ridiculous. And like we've both seen the Arsenal fan base do some wild stuff over the years, but like this might take the cake, honestly, in terms of just how, beyond the pale it is.
Yeah, I mean, I got into so like I posted about this on Twitter, and that was my mistake because I think I got like something like 100,000 views and countless people coming in saying like I'm the one that's in the wrong for not protesting, which is bizarre to me because I'll always like, even when deals happen that I don't necessarily agree with, and there have been some, there may be more coming this summer, I still will always fall into the camp of, at the end of the day, I'm not employed by Arsenal Football Club to make decisions. It's not my money. They have, I like to fancy myself someone who understands football probably maybe better than the average person, but I'm not working in football to the level of where I'm making decisions, right? I'm not spending the money. So at the end of the day, I have to kind of have faith in what the club are doing. And I do feel like when the club has gone out and spent like considerable money, usually that comes off quite well. More often than not, when we spend past a certain mark, we hit that target with in terms of the signing coming through. So that's kind of where I'm leaning with Madueke. Like, you can say like Raheem Sterling and those kind of deals, sure, but he was on a loan. I don't care. You know what I mean? Like it sucked, but it didn't cost us a penny. He's still Chelsea's problem, really, at the end of the day. So, but to sit there and not just DM him, like confidently, but also then to just go out and sign, go on a website and sign a petition as if the club are going to say, "Oh, there's a petition. We're not going to do this business now." Like the level of entitlement some fans think they have will always blow my mind, genuinely, because I promise you, a club as large as Arsenal, who are a global entity, who are one of the 10 biggest clubs in world football, arguably, that has a fan base consisting of whatever it is, however many millions of fans, they're not going to care that 2,000 people don't want them to do the Madueke signing, at least 2,000 documented people. And it's silly to me how those same people, some of the responses to my post that were saying, well, we did the same thing for Wenger out and look how that worked out. I'm like, there's two entirely different things, first and foremost. But beyond that, like, your opinion just does not matter that much. I'm sorry. Like, it genuinely doesn't.
The Wenger out thing, like, that happened for years.
Right. It wasn't
people were protesting Wenger for like over a half a decade before the club finally took that decision.
And there was also precedent to take that decision. And also, Wenger himself had long said that, depending on certain factors, he may have left Arsenal earlier on his own accord. And sometimes he maybe regrets not doing things like managing France, managing England, going to Real Madrid where he had the opportunity to do that. So it's a bit more nuanced and complex than that. But this one instance is just like these. And I forget who said it, but I responded. I think once fans caught wind of even the possibility that we might go after Rodrygo, that's all that mattered at that point. Like, no other player on the planet ever could matter to these fans anymore. If it wasn't Rodrygo, it couldn't be anybody else. And if it was somebody else, then the club aren't doing enough to support the fans and show ambition. And I just think that football is too complex to say that your season lives and dies with the acquisition of one player. And to me, I think it's just stupid at that point. So yeah,
it's just crazy the level of entitlement that fans have. And honestly, I do think fan engagement is important. What the fans think is important most of the time. I don't really think that's the case when it comes to acquisitions and sales.
No.
Because at the end of the day, we're a very emotional group of people, right? And just look at some of the players that we have responded poorly to. When we signed Kai Havertz, it was almost apocalyptic in terms of how people reacted to that. And I think he's been one of our best players since he's arrived, right? And then when you think about Gabriel Jesus, and people were talking about how they didn't want to sign City substitutes and they thought he wasn't good. I was arguing with people about Jesus and explaining to them, his goal record and his stats on FBref and stuff like that, and how he was a good player. Just, he was behind Erling Haaland basically in the pecking order. And, we can go on. And Ben White, even when we signed Ben White, people were really skeptical about that as well. And they didn't know who he was. So, we often don't know what we're talking about when we talk about players. And like, that's not to say that we don't know anything, right? Because, we watch, the tape, and we watch these players week in, week out in the Premier League, and, we consume all this media and stuff like that. But the club have access to information that we couldn't begin to imagine when it comes to these players, right? They have access to underlying data and underlying metrics that make, FBref and FOTMob look like child's play. They have access to, health data, right? That's confidential and will never be seen by us common folk, right? They know everything about his background. They know what he gets up to in his personal life. So like to sit here and basically say that we know better than the club, I don't think that's the way to do it. If you disagree with the move, I'd find myself doing that less and less, kind of the more it's sunk in for me. But if you disagree vehemently with the move, that's your right. But the way the people are just kind of acting like they that we employ a bunch of schmucks who like who are just, that we employ a bunch of clowns. I just, I don't think that's true. We're not Manchester United. I think these people still have a pretty good idea of what they're doing.
Yeah, I think that's kind of sums it up. And yeah, I mean, like, credit due to people like Adam Vogue and Scott Willis who do well about data analysis. That's all well and good. But even with stuff that they put out there, it still pales in comparison to what clubs can see, what clubs do compile on players. And I'm friends with multiple people who work as like chief scouts, as scouts for clubs, and they really can't even tell you a lot of the time what is stuff that they can do, and that's okay. Like, I think fans do forget that, the eye test isn't just enough. Like, and just data isn't just enough. It's scouting players, and it's such it's like a broader, more deeper thing that I think the average everyday fan genuinely gets. And yeah, I'm with you. I think if someone disagrees with the move, that's fine. Disagreeing isn't the problem. It's how you go about displaying that matters to me. And quite frankly, anyone who either signed that petition, entertained it, or DM'd him, I'll just block them. I don't care, because I think for me, at the end of the day, that shows that your support for players in the club is conditional based off of if your own personal needs are met, and that's just not how fandom works for me anyway. And if it works that way for you, that's okay. We just won't ever align. Basically, I just don't see it. I didn't think that. I think that's. I say this confidently. That's to me, that's like that borderlines on like a clinical anger management problems. If that's how you act out on social media and feel like you're justified, and that to me, like, you should probably go seek professional help. I can say that pretty confidently too. Like, that's just weird behavior. It's weird behavior.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the same people who like would risk like cancer on somebody's child, or like say they hope their wife miscarriages because they don't agree with how they've been playing. That level of stuff to me is like that's weird. That's weird at minimum. So
Yeah, it's I think some people kind of are in this situation where they view sports as an escape, or they view sports as like kind of their punching bag.
sure.
And I think if that's how you engage with football, maybe you need to find something else to just get rid of that anger, or at
Like
least
punching
something.
bag. Go ahead and actual punching bag.
Yeah,
That's healthy for you. Like,
and
and go on.
like look, I again, like, I'm still not thrilled about it, but I went and had a burger and a cupcake, and I petted a couple of dogs, and I talked to, a friend of mine who's an Arsenal fan about it, and I feel a little better. Just do that. You don't have to DM players, you don't have to sign petitions, you don't have to, get your signs ready for match week 1. I just think some people really make football too big a part of their life. And like, it's fine for it to be a significant part of your life, but don't make it everything to the point where if you're upset about it, you have nowhere else to put that anger. Because I do think that leads to some really unhealthy things. But let's talk about Madueke.
Sure.
I think probably the best way to do this is a shot and then a chaser. So let's talk about the concerns first,
Okay.
and then we can move on to making the case for
Yeah,
Madueke,
that
because contrary to seemingly popular opinion, I do think there are some things to be excited about when it comes
Yeah,
to
agreed.
Madueke.
Agreed.
So, kind of just up front, like, what are the concerns that you have about Madueke?
I think for me, the biggest one is, like, will he translate to a left winger if that's the vision for him, right? That's probably the primary one, and you can probably stack him against someone like a Rodrygo, who the sample size is quite small. And Scott Willis did a post on this, but his numbers look more favorable from the left, even though he's predominantly been played on the right for Real Madrid. You can make that case. Well, why wouldn't we just go get Rodrygo then? I think there's other considerations that we were not going to touch about today. But I think that for me, that's the biggest one. And if the pathway for him isn't to play on the left, but rather it's to be on the right, then my overall concern beyond that is, what does that mean for Nwaneri? Is he going to be restricted of minutes, or we're going to full time move him to be Odegaard's understudy? I think that makes the most sense, because I think as a profile, there's been a lot of talk that his future might actually be centrally, and if for some strange reason, Odegaard just can't hack it the next year or two, if he gets moved on for whatever reason, having Nwaneri already in house, learning from him, already in the first team, maturing, that's the in-house replacement right there. You don't have to even worry about that kind of question mark depending.
Yeah.
So as long as Nwaneri's pathway isn't Is that as long as there's no roadblock involved with that I'm probably less worried about. I think the biggest thing for me is how we're going to utilize Madueke, and I do think there's some things to like about it there too. I don't want to pull up the post because it's going to require a bunch of clicking, but again, Scott did another post about how Madueke compared to the average Premier League winger last season, and he's immeasurably better than the average winger in the Premier League for the underlying data. He's better than some players that fans wanted, like Mohamed Kudus, like Anthony Elanga. The metrics behind him are better than those players, and they went for the money they went for. I think for me, the other concern would be, did we spend too much? But I also understand, like, this is a market now where you have like McAtee might leave Man City for 20 to 25 million pounds, and he's barely played for them.
Yeah,
you have people like Elanga going for similar price, Kudus similar price. That's the going rate for a very solid to decent to good Premier League proven winger, whether if they're going to start for you or if they're just going to be really like a necessary depth option for you. That's the going rate for it. I think when you look at how the deal might break down, it might end up being something like 42 plus 10 and potential add-ons. If that's the case, I think that's actually more favorable. I'm not concerned about the wages because he was only making like £50,000 a week at Chelsea, apparently. So even if you double that, that's still Trossard money. I'm fine with that for a player who has much more of a potential upside than Trossard does currently. Again, like England and national Premier League proven, helped Chelsea to silverware last season, helped them get Champions League again. I think there's a lot to like about him. I'm with you in that camp. I think most fans, are incorrectly focused on the fact that he's coming from Chelsea, and that's been hit or miss when we've done it. And sure, I can understand like maybe a part of that argument, but I'm with you. I think Havertz has been one of our best players since he's come in. He was from Chelsea. Jorginho was still, I think for me, underrated in this fan base. He came from there. You know what I mean? We're getting Kepa, who he's coming from Chelsea just because he was loaned out, but he's arguably he'd probably start for half of the teams in the Premier League tomorrow if he went somewhere else. So, yeah, I just kind of feel like there are legitimate concerns with him, and there are also, I think, just faux concerns of people just kind of clutching at straws to find any kind of talking point to put them off the move, and I can't really abide those. In terms of actual concerns, that's probably it for me. I just feel like, how are we going to use them? The other thing is, I don't think it'll happen, but the bigger concern is, will this stop us going to get Eze and Gyökeres or whoever it might be? And the reporting is that it won't, but that can always change, right? We have no idea what will happen moving forward from now that he's going to be an Arsenal player. As long as we still bring in someone like Eze and Gyökeres, for example, I think you could call this window like a 7 out of 10 or 8 out of 10. It's hard not to, plus Mascara, if we confirm that too. That fleshes out a lot of our depth that we needed. It improves the depth that we had. And I think it allows us to compete a little bit better with other clubs who, like, if you look at City's bench, like City have like 5 Maduekes on their bench, like that level of player. Like, and Arsenal fans have been calling for that kind of depth for however many years now, 2-3 seasons maybe. So I don't see the angst about including that player into the fold when also he already has some built-in relationships with a lot of his England colleagues. Like we see pictures of him with, Eze if he comes in, with Saka. And he's played with Rice as well. So when you're getting that kind of already understanding coming from a player who already knows the league, knows the city, has played against us, knows what we're about, I think there's a lot to be hopeful for. And while there's no guarantee he'll pan out, I think there's a larger guarantee that he would have panned out, or he will pan out, over someone like Bakayoko, who I think is a good young prospect, but there'd be way more questions about if he can hack the Premier League. Like, a lot of people wanted Adingra. Adingra was great in Belgium. He went to Brighton, never kicked on. So that's the risk when it comes to like players coming from those lesser leagues.
and
So
now he just joined Sunderland.
and now he's going, which is a step down from Brighton, like with all due respect. So yeah, I kind of feel like, yeah, I mean, I understand some of the concerns, but I think a lot of them are just manufactured noise, and I think there is still enough to be hopeful about that we're making the right decision. So
Yeah, the thing about Chelsea, right? I understand it to an extent, and then kind of past that point, I think it's a little irrational, right? Kind of, the hatred that some people have for Kai Havertz, right? Like I don't, because like a lot of that's based in us having signed him from Chelsea. I don't understand that because Chelsea, when we signed Havertz, were kind of just, slogging along, very mid, as the kids would say, and they didn't look like challenging for anything. They were still figuring out what they were. Bowley and Igbali were just firing off a bunch of darts and seeing what worked. Now with Madueke, I am a little more concerned, not because it's Chelsea, but because we are paying 42 plus 10 to a team that is in financial trouble and could use the money, but more importantly, is a team that if they have a good season in 25-26, we're talking about a club that could potentially be a competitor in the Premier League and in the Champions League, right? And that's a little annoying for me. Obviously, if we're taking a really good player off their hands, my annoyance is capped. But I am wary of that sort of thing, kind of being us shooting ourselves in the foot. And then kind of in addition to that, I know Madueke looks really good on the stats, and we'll talk about that, because that is contrary to some fans' belief, that is really important. I have never really seen it with him when I've watched him. You know what I mean? I feel like he's a little sloppy on the ball. Definitely, he's not like a Joga Benito watch. You know what I mean? A little scrappy. I don't think he's a great finisher. Um, yeah, I don't know. It's just it's not pretty, but there are things about him that are really encouraging, which we'll get to in a second. And I guess the final thing, this is probably the most minor of my concerns, but I guess the final thing is he's committed a few faux pas, such as saying Wolverhampton is a shithole, and and the penalty incident where he was kind of fighting over the penalty with Cole Palmer. The second thing, I don't think that's going to happen under Mikel Arteta's watch. I think he'll make it very clear that any nonsense like that. Well, first of all, if we sign Gyökeres is taking the penalties. That's number one. But number two, I think Arteta will make it very clear that any nonsense like that will be punished quite harshly. But I think the first thing, right, just I don't think it's this unforgivable sin or anything, but I do think if you're a black player in England and if you are wearing an Arsenal shirt and you tweet something like that, or even just something more innocent, if it's possible to construe it as stepping out of line, you will become public enemy number one, right? Just look at what happened with Miles Lewis Skelly, and Lewis Skelly is flawless character as far as we're concerned, right? So I just think that's something to keep an eye on, something to be worried about. But I don't want anyone to take this as me saying that I have concerns about like his attitude or his mentality, because based on what I've heard, from someone who has like talked to people who are really close to him, it sounds like he's a really good guy. So I'm not overly concerned with that. But yeah, I just think, and on top of those three, I think the biggest concern I have is the opportunity cost. And I think you kind of referenced this. If you sign Madueke, what does that mean for the rest of supposedly the rest of the attacking signings that we have to make? I don't think it gets in the way of Gyökeres, because obviously we entered this summer planning for a center forward and a winger to come in. But does that get in the way of signing an Eze or a Rodrygo? And Eze is on the market. We're talking to Crystal Palace right now, reportedly, according to Fabrizio Romano. Rodrygo has sat on the bench for 5 games straight in the Club World Cup, and now Madrid are out. Looks like they're going to be discussing his future in coming weeks. If he doesn't decide to leave, he might be pushed out. I don't know. He might still decide to stay at Madrid. But kind of the point I'm getting at here, if Gyökeres and Madueke are the only 2 attacking signings we make, I do think that will be pretty disappointing. But if Madueke is part of a larger class of recruitment in the front 3, where we're getting Gyökeres and Madueke, and then maybe one of Eze or Rodrygo, I think that would be a lot more tolerable for me. But if this is coming at the cost of one of those last two guys, I'm a little worried in terms of what our ceiling would be, because I don't want to enter another season where we're relying heavily on Martinelli and Trossard on the left to win us a Premier League or Champions League title.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that, and I too would be frustrated if it ended up being that we don't get one of, say, Enzo Gyökeres because we got Madueke. But again, all the reporting has said that it's not restrictive of those things. I just have faith in that, and the reporting came out that we're going after 3 attacking players. So if you add Madueke to Eze and Gyökeres, there's the 3. I think people's bigger concern is that it's going to stop us from getting Rodrygo, but there's no guarantee we're going to get Rodrygo in the first place. And I think that's kind of what my frustration is behind that. I think, there's a lot of want from a lot of the fans to get him. I've also seen a lot of fans that don't want him, and that makes me happy because I don't want him. But that's another podcast I suppose I missed out on already. So,
well, yeah, I mean, why don't you take a second and explain why you don't want him? Because
so I think
that's
if you believe what was reported today, and I obviously am skeptical, like Real Madrid are going to want like 100 million euros for him, which is outrageous for starters. But at the same time, when you look at the market and what players are going for, it's also not outrageous. That's the thing. So he's under contract until 2028, I think, or 2027. He's got at least 2 years left, maybe 3. So that already means his value can't depreciate too much. He's an established Brazilian international. He's only 24. He's been an established first team regular for Real Madrid for the past 4 or 5 seasons, however long it is. He's won Champions League with them. There's a lot to his CV that means, the valuation of him is not going to depreciate that much, even though they don't want him there anymore. Clubs are still going to want to get the best, deal for themselves. He's also won £250,000 a week already. So will he want more than that? Is he going to push £300,000 a week? Maybe. I have no idea. And if you add those factors in, he's coming off the worst season of his career. And he also has to adjust to the Premier League. And we saw how he disappeared against us in Champions League when they played us. He was invisible on the pitch across both legs. And I just kind of feel like I don't see a player who I think is guaranteed to come here for that kind of money and those wages and be like this godsend who is going to guarantee us the Premier League or Champions. I don't see it. And I never have. So my reaction to the move isn't like a recent revelation or reaction. I've never been in the Rodrygo camp and I've said this to other people before. I think he's a good player. Let's not be hasty. I think he's a good player to a very good player. I don't see a player who, however, is £50 million better and £150,000 of wages better than like Eze, for example. I personally don't see it because I think there are too many questions involved. There's no guarantee he comes to the Premier League and adapts. There's no guarantee he adapts to the club. And that's a lot of money for a question mark, I think. And we've seen other very good players come to the Premier League and absolutely be horrific when they've come from outside the league. And the list is pretty long, actually. And on that list are some players who will go down as some of the best players in their nation's history. Like Shevchenko was useless in the Premier League, and he for a long time was one of the best 3-4 strikers on the planet for however long. And even though he may have regressed slightly, it's basically like that part of his career just doesn't exist in players' minds. So that's how bad he was for them. And obviously the case is different for him, for Rodrygo, because he's younger. I understand it, but I do think people don't understand how hard it is to actually adapt to the Premier League. And I don't give him much credit for much, like in terms of his personality, but Troy Deeney did this video relatively recently where he said he made his first appearance in the Premier League as a professional after coming up from the Championship. And he was blown away at how fast things were. He was blown away by how quick players like John Stones were, how he thought he had a step on him, and all of a sudden John Stones was 3-4 steps ahead of him. He just and he questioned himself. He said, can I actually hack it at this level? That's how difficult the Premier League is. I don't think fans truly understand the levels. And for me, when it comes to Rodrygo, yeah, he's a good player, but if we're going to levy the same criticisms for Gyökeres being in a quote unquote lesser league, La Liga is much more forgiving to attacking players than the Premier League is. Much, much more. I think you kind of have to factor that in too. And I give him credit for a lot of his Champions League performances. He turned up in big moments for Real Madrid. I don't want to take that away from him. That's relevant. And for a club like Arsenal who want to go after big trophies, I think that's part of his package that you would see as a plus point because he's done it in big moments, multiple years. That's valuable. I think that's noteworthy, right? But I think if we're looking at like 60 million pounds for him, I would do it without question. When you start talking about 80, 90 million pounds plus his wages, I don't want it. I think that for me is the dividing line. I think there's a price point. If it drops to, I definitely get warm up to it. But if it's that high, absolutely not. So
Yeah. I mean, I do think I would take Eze over Rodrygo at this point in time because with Eze, you've got a guy in his prime, was in the Arsenal academy as an Arsenal fan, so I just kind of think that's a soft factor that I think plays in his benefit. Um, he would command, I think, lower wages, probably would
yeah,
cost a little less, and also, if reports are to be believed, his release clause is actually really doable. I kind of have to wonder why we're trying to negotiate with Palace, but we'll see. Um, and yeah, I just think he's more used to the level and the style of the Premier League, whereas with Rodrigo, especially considering how late that that saga would play out, right? Rodrigo's not a guy that you bring in before preseason. Rodrigo's a guy who probably shows up in the last couple weeks of the transfer window, and at that point, it could be months before he's actually kind of acclimated and ready to really contribute at 100%. So I wouldn't mind it, but yeah, I mean the 100 million euro mark is crazy. I think, you know, I'd be willing to do it at 80, maybe.
yeah,
But
because
but
80
even
million
then,
euros, well, like 70 million pounds, roughly, give or take. And at that
yeah,
point, I could maybe be okay with that too. But yeah, I've got similar concerns with you. Like we've all talked about how fast we have to hit the ground on this season. We've got a horrendous opening 6 weeks of the Premier League season. We're
yeah,
going to want to hit the ground running in Champions League. We've already got other players who are coming from outside the league that have to adapt. Zubimendi has to adapt to the Premier League. Assuming we get Gyökeres, he also has to readapt to England and also adapt to the Premier League because he never played in the Premier League, even though he played in the Championship. So we're already looking at two key additions who have to adapt to the Premier League. Do you want a third one to have to do the same? That's a huge chunk of our expected star power that all have to adapt to the club, the league, the country in the
yeah.
same season. That's a lot. So I do
Especially
think. Go on.
especially guys who are like going to figure in starting 11, at least how we
Right.
imagine it, right?
Yeah, I agree, and I think that's why I'm. That's one of the things that comes with Madueke is he has a limited amount of adaptation period that he needs theoretically, and same with Eze. I think those are plus points that you can't really ignore. And again, I think that's why a lot of times, even though there's so many big clubs that can pull players from all across the world, they will still oftentimes look for players who are already in the country. Bayern will still buy players from Germany regularly. Real Madrid and Barca, they will still buy players from Spain. The big Italian clubs, they will still buy players who are in Serie A, even if they're not
Yeah.
Italian. I think all those things do matter. Yeah, it's tricky. My opinion is fluid though. I think if we hear more news about the price point and it drops by like 20 million, then I could probably be talked into it. Maybe. I'm still not big on like how much it would cost wages wise. Like I still have my concerns, but I think it would be less detrimental like on like a financial outlay standpoint if it's iffy. It's just a lot, but you know.
Yeah, it's a big commitment, and that's why I do kind of agree with this point that maybe people need to pull back a little bit with how they feel about Rodrigo. And this happens every season.
Right.
People hear an exotic name that they get a little attached to, and then it's kind of the be all end all of the transfer window, right? So again, Rodrigo, excellent player. I do think there's other left wing options if that's off the table. And I would just hope they doesn't go to like City or Chelsea or something. But we'll we'll see in that regard. But
Mm.
um, yeah, good player. I don't think it's enough to kind of like blow up the summer over. Um, let's move on to the chaser when it
Mhm.
comes to Madueke. Let's expand a little bit on kind of the reasons to be excited. Um, because like I said earlier, I think there's a lot when you think about it, right? He's 23 years old, which means that he's just coming into his prime in that position. He's 6 feet tall, very quick. The underlying numbers look really good. I think he's like in the 99th percentile for uh, progressive carrying. I think he's like in the 96th percentile for attempted shots, 93rd for touches in the penalty area. Maybe you switch the 93 and the 96 there.
His
But
expected goals for wingers is also pretty solid.
yeah,
His expected assists are also not bad. Like I think there's a lot to like about him in terms of what you hope he would bring. I agree with what you said before. I think we talked about this in the group chat a few days ago. That there are moments when he played for Chelsea where like the final action was lacking. But I think part of that also might have to come down to Chelsea itself. Because if you look at a lot of those moments, there's maybe one player in the box. And we've struggled with the same thing at Arsenal in previous seasons where a player gets in a good position to maybe put a ball across the face of goal, a cut back, and no one's there, and all of a sudden the chance goes begging. And I do think there was a lot of that at Chelsea as well. I'd be inclined to hope, obviously we can't guarantee, but hope that when you put him into an attacking system that isn't as dysfunctional, around players who understand their roles and assignments far better. If you add players in the team who also just create space for others by being like a Gyökeres who always wants to get forward and run, that instantaneously creates space for creative players behind him, opens up gaps for someone to run into on the ball, like what Madueke can do, like what Eze could do, or Saka, or even Odegaard, whoever it might be. I think if you add those little intangibles into it, maybe there's a player now that actually could perform. I think the biggest question again is is he going to be doing this on the right instead of Saka or on the left? And then you hope that his game can transition to the left. And I made a point in another group chat the other day where one of the best strikers of the Premier League era for Arsenal was Robin van Persie. And we can hate on him all we want for him leaving. We signed him as a left winger. He broke into Feyenoord's team as a left winger. He spent 2 seasons at Feyenoord playing on the left wing. We then bought him. He stayed as a left winger because we had Henri and Adebayor here. He very rarely ever put center forward until the room was made available for him to play there. And then over time, he became one of the top center forwards in the world as he matured. So it frustrates me that fans sometimes think players cannot become something that they weren't previously, especially when you're younger. The younger you are, the more chance that you can be malleable in terms of readapting your game to a different position. So the fact that he's that young, I think there's room and scope to suggest that he can transition from the right to the left. Whether he can or not, I don't know, but I think that there's enough room to suggest that maybe he could. Under a manager who continuously improves younger players that we've seen time and again. Younger players typically seem to do quite well under Ted, and they seem to go from strength to strength historically since he's come in as manager, and even when he was at Man City, on Pep's staff. So, yeah, I think unfortunately, I think more of it is a kind of like a hope than a guarantee, and I get it, but I do think. I mean, if he was like 27, I would have a very different opinion than of a 23-year-old. I think that's also one of the talking points for me. So yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot to like, and the fact that he is that progressive, he wants to dribble and run at players. We lack that, and in Martinelli, he makes attempts, but Martinelli is such a head down player.
Yeah,
and he will dribble himself into a corner. He will dribble himself into a point where he takes his own chance away to be creative. Madueke is more heads up in that regard. He will survey, dribble, and then pick his head back up again after beating one man to see what's available in front of him. And I don't think Martinelli does that. So. Yeah, again, a lot to be hopeful for, but I think the tools are there, and it's just about hoping they translate.
yeah, and kind of in comparison to Martinelli, right? I think for all the issues I have with Madueke's game, I will say he is very decisive in what he wants to do with the ball, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's both on the right and the left. On the actually he does this on both flanks, really, where he'll dribble past players and then he'll decide to cut in and take a shot. And once he does that, he's going to do it. Unless that shot is 100% not on, in which case he'll just lay it off for somebody. He will try to put the ball on target. And then other times, he'll get to the byline and he has a really good cross on his left foot when he's playing on the left flank. I noticed, just lofts that really nicely. So that might be a weapon for us to exploit if we have Havertz playing at striker, or if we have Marino playing as the box crashing left eight or something like that. Right. I do think that'll be really useful. Um, and kind of like in addition to that, if he plays left wing, I think there's something to work with there. Although I'm not sure he's outright a better option than Martinelli just yet.
That's fair.
But if he plays right wing, I'm still fine with that, even if it does come out to 52 million total in terms of the expenditure, because Havertz, who we spent 65 on, he's going to become more of a rotation player this season. Ben
Right.
White, who's 50 million pounds, he's going to become more of a rotation player. Rice, our record signing, might also kind of, I think less so given his importance to the team, but I think he might also come in and out because of the number of options that we have at left eight, and same could be said with Zubimendi as well, right? The point is, I think this is going to be a team that really rotates players. I don't think we're going to rotate for rotation's sake, but I think we are going to, keep players out of the red zone, and we are going to really focus on having a squad that doesn't see the level drop when the star players have to take a moment or have to take a week off or something.
Or God
Um,
forbid get injured. Like
yeah,
insert Madueke into the team last season when Saka goes down, people would probably be way more confident with him starting at right wing than whoever else we decide to start at right wing. Even Moneri, who we all love and appreciate, but I do think a lot of fans also slightly overhyped him just a bit. He's a good young player, but I would say he's not as good as Madueke. So instantaneously, you have a better player there, more
yeah,
experienced,
and
more polished player. So
he Waneri definitely wasn't ready,
of course not. He did
for that.
exceptional well for somebody who isn't ready. That's the thing. Like,
Yeah.
but it's not sustainable. At least not right now. So.
No. Um, and I think kind of on top of that, what I like about Madueke is that, again, he's just like he's a bit of a chaos merchant, and it almost is reminiscent of Gyökeres in terms of the directness and the relentlessness that he has. In terms of, I don't think he's as relentless as Gyökeres, right? But I do think that he's very focused on like on making a move and with a shot on target, right? Whether it's him taking the shot or whether it's him putting the ball into the box. And like you said, I think that plays really well, with having Saka on the pitch, who's going to draw away some coverage, with having Gyökeres on the pitch, who is going to take those snapshots and hopefully put them in the back of the net. You're going to have guys like Rice and Havertz and Odegaard playing as the eights and being able to crash the box. And if you add an Eze to that, you're going to have someone who's also able to play those balls in behind for Madueke to take advantage of. And so, not only are you kind of creating that havoc that low blocks hate to deal with, but also I think you are adding some threat on transition between Madueke and Gyökeres, right? So I think in that respect, that's really promising as well. And kind of on top of all this, Arteta is the winger whisperer, right? This is the guy who turned Leroy Sané and Raheem Sterling at City into superstars, right? This is the guy who helped elevate Saka into one of the best wingers in the world, and at least made Martinelli, I think, an above average option in the Premier League. And for a couple of years there, Martinelli also was kind of in the conversation for one of the best wingers in the Premier League. So Arteta's really good at harnessing the abilities of attacking players. And if he thinks that in Madueke there's a player who he can turn into an elite option, and if he thinks that there's the raw materials there for him to work with, I'm willing to trust him on that and see what he can do. So, just all in all, again, it's not the signing I would have done, and I feel like I've said this a lot and I've been proven wrong. It's not the signing I would have done, but I do think, once Madueke puts on that Arsenal shirt for the first time, I I, I don't think I'm going to have any issues backing him, and I will actually be pretty excited to see to see what happens in that regard.
Yeah, no, again, it's hard to disagree with that. One of the things that you touched on that I wanted to just briefly also add to is that you said, he's decisive in his actions. I think that's really important. And when you compare it to Martinelli, who was, for me, the literal opposite, that's a problem. And one of the things that I've always told like my players when I coach is that I would rather them make a decision and it turn out to be wrong than to not make a decision at all. Like, live and stand on the decision you make. If you there's a teachable moment there as well, especially when you're working with players that are like 14, 15, 16 years old or whatever. But same thing again is just being decisive is important in football. Like, again, if you cut in and try to take a shot and it turns out to be the wrong shot, okay, I'd rather you do that than just stand on a touchline for 30 seconds and not make a decision. And then any sort of attacking, passage of play that we could have had doesn't exist anymore. So I think for me that's also really important. And the other thing is, you mentioned how Gyökeres and Madueke are both more progressive, more direct as players. And I think if you look at the types of players, and we'll come on to Norgaard as well, that we have been signing or are linked with serious interest in, they're all really progressive players. They're all direct, more so than not. Zubimendi is arguably the one of the best, if not the best, like deep sitting sixes in Europe in terms of his ability to bypass the press and play out a land splitting pass. Norgaard is very progressive in the way he passes. He comes from Brentford's system, and he was really good in that role. Gyökeres, same thing. I understand the concerns about him fitting Arsenal in our current tactical makeup, but when you bring in a player like him, you're gonna probably have to tweak something to make it work, right? Madueke, same thing. But also like someone like Martinelli, who we know would probably be a bit more effective in a more direct system that plays into space, right? That transitions faster. Saka can also do that, and he does that as well. Odegaard, same thing. I think if you gave Odegaard, we've been saying this for 2 years now, give him runners in and around him and watch how many assists he would get. And we're now doing that. You maybe would be getting that runner in Gyökeres. You would have that runner in Madueke. You kind of have it in Martinelli. You do have it in Saka when he gets going and doesn't drop so deep. I just think there's too many pieces that we're linked to, or pieces that have already been confirmed, that tell me that we're going to be tweaking the system this season, that we're going to be more incisive, a bit more progressive, a bit more direct, playing faster in transitions. And if we do that, I think there's a greater chance that all of these players come off as signings far better than fans want to consider. And I think I understand why fans analyze these players in the current scope, but I think sometimes you have to look beyond the current scope and say, well, what could we also do? What could we change? What might we be changing to maximize their effectiveness? I don't think nearly enough people are talking about it. So,
yeah, I think a really big mistake that people make when they talk about transfers is they try to plug new players into how we were playing before.
Yeah,
and people don't really think about the change that a player's arrival indicates. Like you said, Zubimendi, that's a guy who gets the ball one touch, two touch, and it's back out. And he's not afraid to play more incisive passes. And Norgaard's kind of a diet version of that in terms of his willingness to play progressively. And then you have Gyökeres, who's just a madman who is going to grab the ball and try to will his way 40 yards toward the goal. Madueke is a little similar in that regard. So yeah, and also you've gone and signed Kepa, a backup goalkeeper who actually is really good on the ball, right?
Yeah.
So he can kind of sustain the way that Raya likes to play. So yeah,
if we had Eze in, Palace were not ball dominant ever, and he's also been a very progressive player. And I do think if you look at all these players, and none of them are ideal tactical fits for Arsenal, what would make more sense? To try to fit them in, or to see a tweak coming from us that means that's why we went for these players? So that would be my greatest hope. And I do think that a lot of us, this podcast included, have talked about a few times about our need to be better, quicker in transitions, more direct, more incisive, take the space when we've got it instead of letting teams sit back and get back into their shape, which is why we struggle against the likes of, the West Hams and the Fulhams of the world when it's not necessary. If they give you the space, attack the space. These are all players that attack the space or put balls into those spaces for players to attack it. So yeah, I just feel like if I had to be like, go on record, I would say that we'll be seeing that next season more than fans expect. And I think this is a large indicator of that. So
Yeah. Yeah. More progressive carrying, more progressive passing, and more incisive and quicker
yeah.
passing.
Mhm.
And also I think more central creation, especially if we bring in Eze. And I think those are all really exciting things that Madueke is part of ushering us into, for whether people like that or not. So uh let's take a few minutes and talk about kind of the guy who unfortunately has had a lot of the spotlight stolen from him today.
Yeah.
Which, poor guy. But we officially announced Christian Norgaard today. And so, you know, just kind of before we get out of here, Drew, what do you think he's going to kind of serve as the Jorginho of last season, where he's going to play very sparingly? Or do you think maybe we're looking at a guy who is going to feature more prominently than maybe people expect?
Maybe a bit of both.
Mhm.
I mean, there's talk a lot that Thomas Frank kind of managed his minutes pretty heavily last season. Like he wouldn't always complete 90 minutes because he's coming off the injury. It's not about his physical ability. It's just like injury post injury management. So maybe I don't think we should expect him to start very often in the season. But if you want, like, there will be few better match closers than him that you could think of. Bring him on in the last 20 minutes, half an hour, because of how good he is at winning the ball back, how astute he is defensively, how he can play the right pass. Like if we're up a goal and teams are pressing us for an equalizer, he's very good at playing balls over the top of the space for us to hit a team on the counterattack to kind of get that 2 goal cushion to seal 3 points kind of thing. Um, his quiet leadership capabilities. He's the seasoned Premier League veteran. Like there's so many like bright spots to him that make me feel like I think we will see him start depending on the match. But I do think almost think of it like like an MLB team bringing in their closer for the last inning and a half or whatever, like as a trusted person. I do think that there's a lot to that as well. And certainly, I think because he doesn't have like that physical degradation that Jorginho had, you could trust him more in that role than Jorginho. Um, yeah, and the fact that like he's good in the air, he can make late runs through the box. He's a goal threat on set pieces. Like these are all little pieces to who he is as a player package that I feel has probably flown under the radar for better or worse. But yeah, I think it's probably going to end up being like one of the more astute pieces of business we would have done this summer, and I'm really excited for it for sure. So
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. And I think he plays that role for Denmark too,
yeah,
where
yeah,
most of his appearances, he's come on as a substitute and helped close the match out. Um, he said something interesting in his first interview at the club where he talked about being in a double pivot last season at Brentford.
yep.
And, I've kind of, we had George on the pod a few weeks ago, and he kind of mentioned that we shouldn't be surprised if Zubamendi kind of gets closer to goal and kind of plays a double pivot with Rice, where Rice might drop back and Zubamendi kind of takes on the 8 role temporarily.
Hmm.
So I kind of wonder if that almost is by design that we signed him, where he's someone who can also come in and kind of play in that double pivot, and maybe we'll see him make his way further up the pitch at times, because he did have his best goal output for Brentford last season.
No,
And I think he did put that down to Thomas Frank allowing him to get further up the pitch at times because he was in a double pivot. So do you think that's something that we're going to see, or do you think Norgaard is really just going to come in and play primarily as kind of
yeah,
a
no.
DP?
I mean, I wasn't on with George, but A, thanks for George for coming on for sure. But also B, I would probably agree with a lot of that, if not most of it, or all of it. Um, yeah, I think one of the biggest things now is that our ability to have like tactical variance is important. Um, Being able to rely on a double pivot in some instances, depending on who we're playing or the match state, and then the final whatever this 20 minutes or half an hour is really important. Um, and if you look at a side like PSG, who do that more now, that's part of their rapid rise, I think, in Europe is their ability to have tactical variance, particularly in central spaces, is really important. Um, I think for us, it's got to be key, and um, I just feel like if you look at if you look at his profile, you could probably make the case of if we're playing against like I don't know Sunderland or Leeds or whatever, and we need some rotation, you could probably play him in Marino and then that will pivot and remove Rice and Mendy, for example, and get similar roles in that way. If you know, um, yeah, no, I just kind of feel like I think it's ironically enough, even despite him being the age profile he is, I can't see, or at least I haven't found it yet, any negative about the move for him. Zero. It's not the contract's not long. The wages are very favorable. His profile is something really needed. I think it's an upgrade on Jorginho, which is also really important because I think Jorginho, the faith in him coming in regularly was lost, certainly last season and certainly as the season progressed. But I would be really confident in starting Norgaard in I guess about maybe against at least half the Premier League, and that's kind of all you need him for.
Yeah.
Listen to the starting way because he knows Ben is going to play the big matches. He knows Ben is going to play in Europe. But again, if it's a heavy match schedule for a month, and we've got Sunderland, Leeds, whoever it is, you absolutely can trust him to play those matches. You can trust him to play against like the West Hams of the world, Villas and such. I think he'd still be quite comfortable in those spaces. So, yeah. But again, to George's point, if we do see double pivot next season, in some instances, it wouldn't surprise me. I think it would be a nice little addition into the back pocket for the manager, just to have something we can throw in when we need it. So
yeah, just a cool tactical quirk of the system that I think would really kind of open things up for us. Last question before we get out of here. Norgaard is wearing the number 16 jersey. How likely do you think it is that he will unsully the legacy of that number at Arsenal Football Club after Rob Holding wore that shirt?
Oh God. I can comfortably say I think he'll be a better Arsenal player than Rob Holding, and I think that bar is quite low. As someone who had some appreciation for Holding in certain instances when he was at Arsenal, I do think overall the shirt needs a bit of rehabilitation. So I feel like Norgaard will probably take that on and do quite well with that. So yeah.
To Holding's credit, he was good when we deployed him like as a third center back to see off narrow wins.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. You've heard everything I have to say on this subject. So.
Yes, I have.
So yeah. Well, look, I feel better about Madueke, honestly. I feel like this is probably going to go off a little bit better than people are expecting it to. And I was already, pretty impressed with the Norgaard signing. So looking forward to seeing how both of those play out. And just kind of a reminder to you, the listener. If you are still upset about the Madueke signing, please leave Madueke alone. Don't sign any petitions. Go find a puppy or a punching bag. Don't do to the punching bag what you're going to do to the puppy, and don't do to the puppy what you're going to do to the punching bag. Get those right, but just don't take your anger out on players. Is what I'm saying.
Or go have a burger like Sham. Have a good meal. Oftentimes will fix moods. So do that too.
I had a nice double patty smash burger, and it was excellent.
Yes, it's hard to beat. There you go.
Go to Joya Burger in DC if you ever get an opportunity. Excellent establishment. Also, they had a what's the word? What's that purple sweet potato?
Ube?
Yeah, they had an ube soft serve. My friend was eating it. I had a bite of it.
That sounds good. I'm not gonna lie.
Ridiculously good.
Yeah, that sounds good. When I'm in DC, we'll have to go because ube is pretty decent, and I love a good burger. So there you have it.
You let me know, man. We'll go get Joya burgers and ube soft serve, and it'll be excellent.
We'll have to invite John. John won't want to miss out.
Yeah. John, when you listen to this, the invitation is open to you as well. So, we'll tell him in the WhatsApp, of course. So, anyway, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for being here, Drew. Thank you for staying up to record this.
No problem.
Bit of an emergency podcast, and I got held up at work. So, But yeah, we will be back next week to talk about any craziness that happens, and I'm sure some craziness will happen. And yeah, just thank you, Arsenal, for giving us some stuff to talk about. It was a tough couple weeks there. So have a great weekend, and we'll be back with you soon. Until then, take care, get your mind out of the gunner, and bye. Bye.
Secret Gooner. All right, I'm a Gooner. Oh, I love you!
With a minute to go. Here's the little man here, Santi Cazorla. Kayo Saka. That is a goal! 20 Eric.